Have you ever wondered about the true value of art? Not just the price tag, but the history, the provenance, the story behind the masterpiece. Today we're talking with someone who knows these stories very well. Rachael Cozad is a trusted voice in art appraisal. With deep roots in Kansas City and a global reach, she guides collectors, institutions, and even insurance companies through the complex, captivating world of fine art. Get ready for a masterclass in the art market. Welcome to Art Bites, a podcast from the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art that takes you beyond just the art on the walls and into the stories of the artists and the ideas behind them. I'm your host, Kathleen Layton, and Rachael, thank you so much for joining us today. You have a rock star background, really. You directed the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art, you led the Madison Group Fine Art Appraisals and Rachael Cozad Fine Art. How did your journey shape your understanding of the art world?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me in, Kathleen. And thank you for that lovely introduction. I've had a really interesting journey, and I like to think that I've had a lot of really amazing opportunities that have come my way. And the thing is, I just haven't been too scared to take a chance to step into them.
Have you always been that way? You kind of leap into something and just throw caution to the wind?
Well, not really, but I guess another reason is I figured out what I wanted to do early on, and I didn't change my mind and, changed careers a bunch of times, and I kind of stayed on my path. So that's been another great thing. And I just, having a real broad range of experience. I was a registrar at the Modern Art Museum for 10 years. I was actually, it's kind of a funny story. I was sort of the proverbial mailroom to the boardroom person at the Modern Art Museum in Fort Worth. I started out as a security guard in the gallery. And then 10 years later, when I left, I was the head registrar. And I had so many wonderful opportunities to learn about their collection, which was American art and modern art and some 19th century art and some European art too. But it was kind of a masterclass in the broad spectrum of things that I got to work with.
You really learned it from the bottom up, literally.
Yes. And being a registrar, you're tracking the artwork. So you get really familiar with the collection, but you also, in my case, I got to work on major traveling exhibitions. So it was a really fantastic learning experience. And it kind of taught me too that, the art world is this ecosystem. So we need the collectors, we need the artists, we need the museums and the galleries and the patrons, and it all works together. And that's kind of the one thing that I found working in that museum situation and getting to work with the lenders as well as the board members.
Well, you said you always knew what you wanted to do. Your parents, Ed Blackburn and Linda Blackburn, both artists.
Yeah. You
decided not to become an artist, but their experiences must have shaped your journey, did it?
Oh, absolutely. I took art lessons when I was a kid, but I just never had the natural drive and inclination. But, our house was always filled with artistic people, and not just visual artists, poets and writers and a lot of musicians. And it was a little bohemian at times.
It sounds wonderful.
It was great, but how it is, you always tend to rebel just a little bit against your parents.
You don't want to be just like your parents, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was great, but like my mother's studio was in the living room, and one time she made a big installation of these canvas storm clouds, and she hung them from the ceiling in our living room, and I just felt like I can't have my friends over because my house is not normal. But now thinking back on it, I mean, very cool.
What a wonderful way to grow up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And one time, I think when I was about 10, my dad had an exhibition at the Hanson Gallery in New York in Soho when that was, the place in the mid-'70s. And we took the train from Fort Worth, Texas, where we lived, the Amtrak train, which took like 3 days to get to New York. And it was quite an experience for a 10-year-old from Fort Worth.
It sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it was great. And, I got to meet a lot of artists, too.
For someone who might not be familiar, can you explain what an art appraiser does?
Oh, sure. One thing that I think people don't know, I think a lot of people imagine an appraisal as somebody's letterhead with a number on it. And that's not at all what it might have used to be at, years ago. But now it's much more regulated, and we have a lot of credentials that we have to get in the first place in order to be certified or accredited. And then we have a lot of continuing ed that we have to do as well. So it's a somewhat difficult profession if you're not kind of geeky about it.
Well, you have to love it.
You have to love it. You have to be committed because you're essentially, always writing a report or doing some research. So we do appraisals for specific reasons. Like I've worked with a lot of donors, giving things to the Nelson on, appraising their work for charitable donation. But we also do it for insurance coverage and insurance loss. So in the case of damage, we also do it in the case of divorce or death for charitable donation or equitable distribution among different parties. And so these days, appraisal reports are considered quasi-legal documents because they may be used in a court, or by the IRS.
And the continuing education, what does that look like?
Well, you have to be certified in your specific area of interest, and some people have more than one area. And then within those areas, there might be subcategories. But there's always changes in the market that you want to stay on top of. There's always the opportunity to learn from your colleagues who are specialists in other areas that you're not as familiar with. There's always opportunities to go to an annual conference or tour a special place, go behind the scenes at some place like Winterthur or something like that. So, but I'd say staying on top of market trends and, what's happening is the main thing with continuing ed.
The art appraisal itself, what are the things you're looking for when you are asked to appraise a piece of art?
Yes, that's a great question. For every single item that you're looking at, you first want to be sure you really know who the artist is and that you're qualified to evaluate something by that artist in the time period, et cetera. And then you want to make sure you understand where that item fits within that artist's larger body of work. And then there are other things to consider, like the quality or connoisseurship aspect of the piece that you're evaluating, the physical condition, the provenance or history of ownership, the exhibition history, the bibliography, has it been reproduced? Is it in the catalog raisonné? A lot of things. And then you also have to look at the current state of the market because that's always changing. And we also have more than one market to look at, depending upon what the purpose of the report is. So it's kind of a marriage between connoisseurship and market analysis, I guess is a good way to put it.
What are some of the misperceptions people have about art appraisal?
Well, I think that a lot of people don't really understand what goes into it. We've had a sort of industry-wide I guess it's kind of just a funny thing, but we call it the Antiques Roadshow effect because a lot of people who watch that show just have the misconception that appraisers are walking encyclopedias, because,
right, and they walk in and they can make a snap judgment about something.
Right. When really it is a TV show, so they have time off camera to do the research and talk to their colleagues and, get ready to present their final opinion. So that's been one thing, but I think a lot of people just, if they haven't had one before, they don't really know what goes into it, and they like I said, they expect it's going to be one page, and it's usually for one item it's about 17 or 18 pages with all of the what we call uniform standards of professional appraising, everything that has to go into it.
Have you ever run into someone who has said, look, I think it's worth a lot more than you're saying?
Yes, and also that goes back to the purpose, because if you're appraising something for insurance coverage, you want that value to be high because you want your insurance company to be prepared to have to pay top dollar in a retail setting in order to replace it. But if you're doing something for estate tax or equitable distribution among the children of somebody who's recently passed, you really want those values to be on the lower end because you're going to have to pay estate tax, so you want them to be low. But they also have to be apples to apples. If you're talking about one kid gets the Oldenburg drawing and, one kid gets the Tebow, you really, you want them to be on an even level. So it's real world versus going out and buying something on the retail market at a higher level.
At Christie's or Sotheby's.
Yeah. And, things change and the markets, go up and down. And what was popular 20 years ago is not necessarily going to be popular today because, it's not only do tastes change, but the people who are buying things to outfit their homes have a different perspective, and they don't necessarily want mom's china or silver anymore, and things like that have flooded the market. So that's why it's important to stay on top of everything with a lot of continuing ed.
Well, we've had a lot of global economic shifts, technological changes. What do you see for the art market in the next few years?
Well, there is a lot to consider. I mean, I think AI is on everybody's, first and foremost on everybody's mind.
And let's back up. How does AI affect what you do?
Well, I feel as though our industry is just starting to wrap their head around what types of services or software or businesses are going to really be offering practical assistance versus what really still needs to be done by an individual who has that connoisseurship piece and who can really synthesize everything according to that artist, because what is important to some artists is not important to others.
And there are some things only a human can do.
Yes, absolutely. The other thing that I know is on my mind is the entry of the financial sector into the art market, because art is seen as a commodity these days as never before. I mean, it really isn't a small art world anymore like it was even 20 or 25 years ago. It's an art industry now. And there are lots of, people who have entered into it thinking, hey, this is hot, I want to get into it. And they might not be that qualified. And also, I don't really have anything against art as an investment, but I don't necessarily like to see it as a commodity so much.
It must make you sad.
It kind of does. And one reason is because a lot of great paintings that might be owned by, 3 people and 3 trusts and 3 corporations as a group, they're in storage somewhere. They're at a free port, or they're somewhere where they're not on view and available to the public. I mean, that's one reason. But it's also just because I maybe a little bit of nostalgia, and I also just feel as though it's kind of short-sighted to just limit great art to thinking of it as, what is it worth? What's its fair market value today versus last Thursday?
Right. I mean,
it's impossible.
It's not a grain future, you know. What about a collector who wants to start their art journey? What advice would you give to them?
Well, that's a great question, too. And when I was director of the Kemper, we had a collectors group, which I know the Nelson also has a similar type of program. And it's so wonderful for patrons who are wanting to get started. And my first suggestion is to just spend a lot of time looking at art.
And looking where?
Looking everywhere you can possibly see it. And I think that adds to the richness of your understanding as well. So, seeing art in Italy or in a European country is just different sometimes than seeing it here. Mm-hmm. The way museums are run in Japan, for example, is really different from how they're organized and set up here. But I think seeing it in gallery context and other collectors' homes, certainly in museum context, going to artist studios whenever you can, anytime you can kind of get in that back door, and see something that's a little bit more of behind the scenes is super valuable. And that's one thing you get when you travel with museum groups or go somewhere with a curator or an educator. So that's really important. And just looking also at publications too, online or actual magazines, and just training your eye, because I think that's the first thing you need to do. And then for people who are starting to buy, one suggestion is buy multiples first. Anything that's a photograph or a print or a small edition sculpture, something like that, because the cost is not as great. Mm-hmm. And if you kind of switch gears and change your collecting style down the road, they're easier to sell on the secondary market, and they're just not as expensive, to get into in the first place.
And then you don't feel this heartburn in the middle of the night. What did I just do?
Right. And don't buy, don't buy at on a cruise. Don't buy something at an auction after you've had 2 glasses of champagne, unless you were planning to buy it before you went there.
Before the champagne.
Right.
What about a seasoned collector looking to expand a collection? Is it just more of the same, or what would you suggest?
Well, I think most people who intend to self-inform themselves can do that. If they've already made one collection or had one sort of focus, they'll kind of know how to move into another area if that's what they want to do and they have the time to educate themselves. But that's an area where an advisor can come in and help you, because it takes a lot of time. So if you've been collecting contemporary photography and you want to move over to Latin American art or old masters, it helps to have somebody just get the lay of the land for you, tell you who the good galleries are, tell you who the good artists are, and tell you where to go and what to see and that sort of thing.
Should you buy what you like, what looks pleasing to your eye?
I think so. I think that's really the most important thing versus buying what the Joneses have,
Or what seems to be a hot new person coming on the scene?
Yeah, it's not always, it may have a sizzle, but maybe not so much steak, The other thing I tell people is look at the artist's resumes and learn how to really assess those, the CV or the resume or whatever kind of bio the artist has, because what you want is factual information about the artist and their accomplishments and what sort of critical review they've had. What you don't want is a lot of flowery descriptions and glamour shots of the artists themselves,
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you can kind of get a quick assessment of, is this really an understanding of who the artist is and what they've done, or is it more of a marketing tool?
Mm-hmm. Don't go for the flashy.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had any personal experience that has really affected you pretty profoundly in your long career?
I have a couple, yes. One that I've talked with Julian Zugazugorcia about was something that I do consider profound. When I was at the Kemper 9/11, and I hadn't been there but just a few months, and had come from a much smaller environment where I had a small staff, and here I had a staff that was a lot larger. And on that day, just figuring out what does a leader do when the world is having this, crisis, humanitarian crisis.
Mm-hmm. That we haven't experienced
that
before.
We had never experienced, exactly.
And Julian, of course, the CEO of the Nelson-Atkins.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Well, what happened to me was I think the first day or two after the tragic occurrence, I was thinking, what do we do as a museum? How do we help people who are experiencing this tragedy of this magnitude? And then just a couple days after, I noticed in our galleries, people were coming in and standing around a particular painting. And it's a painting by an artist named Stephen Assail. Very large painting, like almost life-size, of two figures. One is standing, and he looks as though he could be a first responder or a fireman, and he's holding a baby. And the baby looks like it could possibly be asleep, could possibly be hurt, or could possibly be dead. Mm-hmm. And one figure's black and one figure's white. And I'm not going to tell you which is which, because I want to encourage people to go and see it for themselves. And I mean, it was an incredible painting that people just were drawn to at that moment. And it really reinforced to me how important art is and what it means. And it gave me my own fresh perspective on what it means to be a museum educator or a museum director, and what museums are about, and the value at times when humanity is grasping for something. Mm-hmm. So it was a great. In hindsight, it was a valuable
right
experience.
During the moment, but offering comfort and solace, which
Absolutely.
is something that we say, but when you see it in action, it really makes an impact on you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, you're so welcome, Kathleen. It was a real pleasure.
I appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Art Bites, a podcast from the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art. I'm Kathleen Layton. We'll see you next time.